Good afternoon, welcome to the latest in our water cooler conversations. Although today there is no conversation, it's purely monologue because today we're going to focus purely on the outcomes of the budget, which was announced by Rishi Sunak earlier this afternoon, and what impact that may have for dental practice owners across the UK as we sort of digest that. Now, I think obviously first things first, to be honest, I think the budget was fairly, in my view, light on some of the announcements that have been touted in the press over the past few days. And in fact, having read the budget document now, all 107 pages of it, there was only 5 references in the document to capital gains tax. So actually the much anticipated increase or change in capital gains tax legislation doesn't appear to have come to any fruition. There's no mention at all in the budget of business asset disposal relief, which means that we can only assume that is remaining at £1 million as it was set in the budget last year. And likewise, that gains on disposal of assets that aren't linked to residential property will remain at the 20% level. As have been historically, which is great news in my view, because let's face it, they were never going to go down. They were only ever going to go up. So in that respect, it would look like we breathe another day. Of course, there was a couple of small tweaks in that the thresholds for capital gains tax, at which point it kicks in, are going to remain static beyond the budgeted increase that had already been touted from the 1st of April. That will remain static, but in all fairness, that makes very little impact to dental practice owners when they sell their dental practice. It's not a massive move. Of course, akin to that, they also maintained all personal income tax thresholds beyond April this year that had already been touted. So I think you get about £100 extra this year, but then after that, nothing more until 2026, which of course is a tax increase by stealth, because whilst in cash terms it means tax doesn't go up, in real terms, when you equate the time value of money and the depreciation of currency, that is of course a tax increase in not so many words. So but that again had been largely touted and largely slated in the press over the last few days and weeks. So a few things that were in the budget. There was, of course, this new super deduction, which the way the budget reads means it will only apply to companies. So it doesn't look like it's something that will apply to sole traders. But as with all these things, sometimes the detail does come out in the days preceding. But the super deduction, in theory, will allow for 130% relief on any investment on capital expenditure linked to plant and machinery, which in turn would cover dental chairs and OPG machines and clefts and all that kind of stuff. So if you are considering developing your practice and you certainly trade as a limited company at this moment in time, it would seem for the next 2 years, so he's only announced this relief for the next 2 tax years, then there will be some extra relief for you against your against your profits moving forward. So you'll get that. Equally, though, of course, he did say in the very same budget, which if you like is probably the one that's going to catch the headlines tomorrow morning, is that the rate of corporation tax will go up in 2 years' time. So it's not going up next tax year that we're about to go into. It's not going up the tax year after that. It's going up from April 2023 to a rate of 25%. For roughly about 10% of companies, they estimate. And I say that because there were a couple of sort of hidden, not hidden per se, but there were a couple of other elements to that. So the first being that if you are a small company, and by that they're defining a business that's generating profits of less than £50,000, that the corporation tax rate will remain at its current rate of 19%. So that may affect some people who are maybe working as an associate and how they sort of declare their profits. So you may get away with that sort of 19%. Secondly, there is a tapering period then from anyone who's got a profit somewhere between £50,000 and £250,000. Again, the details of that tapering have yet to be released, but there will be some tapering, which means you'll pay somewhere between 19 and 25%. If it's anything like the taper relief as it's used to be, the nearer to £50,000 to £60,000 you are, the nearer to the 19% you will be, the nearer to 250,000, the nearer to the 25 to 24% you're going to be. It won't necessarily be linear, but there will be some sort of tapering between the different levels of profitability there. So it may, again, that may have an impact on those of you with smaller dental practices. It may mean you don't quite have to pay the 25%, but a lot of dental practices I look at, I would estimate are certainly going to have a hike in corporation tax beyond sort of 21, 22%. That kind of covers, if you like, the tax bits. There were a few other sort of things associated with the running of the practice. So the first of all, for those of you with sort of employed ancillary staff on relatively low hourly rates or junior members of staff, the national minimum wage is going up from April the 1st to £8.91 per hour. Of course, at the moment it's £8.72. So that will be an extra sort of 13 pence an hour in addition to what they're currently paying. If you're recruiting and you take on an apprentice, then the bonus or the incentive, if you like, to take on an apprentice has doubled from £1,500 to £3,000, and that runs to the end of September 2021. So that's quite a short term, if you like, bonus. And they have extended furlough. Now, I don't think a lot of dental practices still have people on furlough, but if you've got shielders or similar people like that, and people who are apprehensive of coming back to work, and you've let them remain on furlough whilst the practice is running slightly differently, then that furlough scheme has now been formally extended till the end of September. But again, the devil was in the detail in the budget, in the fact that it's remaining as it currently is until the 1st of July, whereby you just pay the employer's national insurance and pension contributions. In July, you'll have to also pay 10% of their salary, because the government will only give you the 70%, but you have to pay them 80%. And in August and September, that will change to 20%. A contribution from the employer plus the employer's pension and then plus the 60% from the government. You have to pay them 80%, though. It can't be you can just pay them the 60% that you get from the government. Otherwise, that would be in breach of the scheme. Most of you will also fall into the category of small or medium-sized employer. So under the SSP rebate scheme, which was specially introduced for COVID, it does mean you can get full rebate under the statutory sick pay scheme for anyone who's self-isolating. It's touted within the budget document that that will be brought to an end soon, but there's no date on that. So if I was a guessing man, I imagine it will again be September kind of time. Certainly not before the end of these sort of lockdown measures for the end of June, but I'd imagine fairly shortly afterwards that that will be removed as well. For those of you who are looking to borrow more money, now I know some of you have borrowed money not necessarily for the basis of running your business, but obviously it's quite cheap money and quite easily accessible from the banks, given the fact that the government are underwriting 80% of the risk. They have launched a new loan scheme as well called the Recovery Loan Scheme, which comes into place from the 6th of April. The interesting part on this one is that you will be eligible for it as long as you meet the criteria, even if you've already had a B-bills or a C-bills loan. So it's an additional support. So when, of course, with C-bills, you couldn't have B-bills as well. You had to pay back your bounce back loan and then take out your C-bills, whereas it would seem with this scheme, you can have participated within one of those two schemes before. The same as those schemes, and indeed the EFG scheme that was in situ prior to this, is that there is no personal guarantor required for any loan up to £250,000, and they cannot take your personal private residence by means of security. They can, of course, over 250k take security, but it can't be your personal home. Although there is, of course, nothing in there yet about what interest rates will look like. So this, again, is a loan. It's not a grant. You'll have to pay it back. You can only amortize these loans over 6 years in the same way that you did for the B-bills and C-bills loans. So it's quite a short, sharp repayment period. But in that same breath, the interest rates will be obviously a commercial interest rate from the bank. So it may well be that when they come out, actually, they're not quite as attractive as they sound, particularly when you consider some of the loans we can get our hands on in dental at the moment, which actually, in a number of respects, have actually been cheaper than some of the C-bills loans on the market. So there is an interest in there. So I just mentioned, I said 6 years. It's 6 years for the recovery loans. The same, and there are also loans under this scheme available for overdrafts, which are a 3-year repayment period, but a 6-year repayment period for those loans covering asset finance, or those loans covering just a straightforward term loan, as they refer to it. That's pretty much about it. There was a couple of other little bits. Obviously, alcohol and fuel duty remaining the same, so we can all go and fill up our cars and drink pints and whiskey and things like that, and wouldn't pay any more tax. And secondly, for those who perhaps new dentists or new associate dentists, the self-employment scheme has been extended to those who've just filed a tax return, for which some of you may be eligible, but I know in the main it wasn't eligible for most of our clients. Thank you very much for listening. I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.